Late one autumn evening, Evelyn Hart walked through the quiet palace courtyard with her usual calm steps. She had worked at the royal palace for a little over 3 years, long enough to learn how silence in the palace often meant more than noise. Tonight, however, the silence felt different. The air was colder. The lamps along the stone path flickered as if touched by an unseen breeze, and the guards standing at the gates exchanged looks that felt heavier than usual. Evelyn sensed something unusual, but she kept walking, holding a stack of folded linens against her chest. She had barely reached the east wing staircase when she noticed a royal messenger approaching. He was young, dressed in the traditional navy coat with golden buttons, and slightly out of breath as if he had been searching for her. Without saying a word at first, he held out an envelope, sealed with the king's crest, a lion holding a crown. The moment Evelyn saw it, her breath caught in her throat. In all her time working here, she had never received anything directly marked with the royal seal. Messages like that were usually reserved for high-ranking advisors, ambassadors, or people far more important than a simple palace aide. "Miss Hart," the messenger said softly, almost whispering as if afraid the walls might overhear him. "You are requested to open this immediately. Instructions are inside." CP, Evelyn nodded, thanked him, and waited until the messenger disappeared around the corner. Only then did she slide her finger beneath the seal and open the envelope. Her eyes widened as she read the short message inside. It instructed her to report to the Grand Hall at exactly midnight. No explanation, no details, only a line stating that her presence was specifically required for rehearsals regarding the upcoming coronation of the king. For a moment she wondered if it was a mistake. She held the note closer to the lantern beside her, checking if the ink looked smudged or rushed. It didn't. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. The order was real. But why her? Evelyn thought of all the palace staff, hundreds of workers, trained attendants, senior aides, and she was certain she was not the first person one would select for something as important as coronation rehearsals. Still, the letter was clear. Midnight. Grand Hall. No exceptions. As she walked back to her small room in the servants' quarters, she felt something new rising inside her, a mixture of curiosity and nervous excitement. The coronation was only weeks away, and everyone in the palace had been preparing in their own departments. Seamstresses worked late into the night, sewing robes, kitchen staff experimented with recipes for the grand feast, and decorators polished hundreds of chandeliers and silver pieces. But Evelyn had assumed she would play only a small background role carrying linens, adjusting curtains, or ensuring the tea service was prepared. She never imagined being part of anything secret or extraordinary. Once inside her room, she sat on her neatly made bed and read the message again. Midnight. She checked the small clock on her wall. She had a little more than 2 hours. It felt like a long time and no time at all. She changed her uniform, smoothing the front of her gray dress and tying her apron with steady hands. She brushed her hair, pinned it neatly, and took a moment to stare at her reflection. She looked the same as always, gentle brown eyes, tidy posture, a calm face. Yet inside, she felt as if she were standing at the edge of something unknown. The palace at night was unlike the palace during the day. When Evelyn stepped out into the corridor a little before midnight, she noticed how the usual hustle was gone. Instead, soft footsteps echoed in the distance, and candles flickered in long rows, guiding her path like small glowing stars. The palace was old, hundreds of years of history, stories, celebrations, and secrets hidden within its walls. Evelyn felt that she was about to witness one more secret, one very few would ever know about. As she approached the Grand Hall, she saw 2 guards standing at the large carved doors. They were dressed in ceremonial uniforms, more formal than the usual evening attire, which made her wonder just how serious these rehearsals were meant to be. One guard recognized her name on the list he held and stepped aside, pulling the heavy doors open. The moment Evelyn entered, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The chandeliers, usually dimmed at night, were glowing with full brilliance, scattering golden light across the marble floors. Dozens of musicians tuned their instruments at one end of the hall, their soft notes floating like gentle waves in the air. Attendants were arranging decorations, fixing long velvet banners, and adjusting floral arrangements. Everything looked ready for a celebration, yet somehow unfinished, as if waiting for one final touch. Evelyn noticed that everyone present seemed to understand the importance of the gathering. Their movements were careful, precise, almost quiet. She walked slowly toward the other aides, some of whom she recognized. They gave her small nods, acknowledging her presence without asking questions. It was clear that no one knew exactly why they had been selected, but no one dared speak of it openly. The air carried the weight of something special, something rare. In the center of the hall stood the king. He wore a simple dark robe, not the royal one. Not yet, and he looked thoughtful, almost nervous. Evelyn had seen him many times from a distance. Always composed, always confident. But tonight, he seemed different. There was a faint tension in his shoulders, and he kept glancing toward the throne as if rehearsing a quiet conversation in his mind. The royal advisor, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, clapped his hands gently to gather everyone's attention. His voice echoed softly across the hall. He explained that these midnight rehearsals were meant to ensure every moment of the coronation would be flawless, because the ceremony would be watched by thousands and remembered for generations. The king needed a private space to practice without the pressures of the public eye. For centuries, some of the most important rehearsals had been held at night, hidden from view, to maintain the magic and dignity of the final event. Evelyn listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She was assigned to assist with timing the procession and ensuring the ceremonial fabrics were arranged properly on the throne platform. It sounded simple, yet the advisor reminded everyone that even the simplest detail could shape how the world remembered the coronation. When the musicians began the first practice sequence, the hall filled with warm, powerful music. The king stepped forward, following the exact path he would take on the day of the coronation. Attendants practiced lifting the ceremonial robe at the right moment, placing symbolic items in the correct order, and coordinating every gesture with the music. Evelyn, though nervous, focused on her tasks with steady attention. She watched the procession closely and counted each step carefully. She adjusted the folds of the velvet cloth with gentle hands, making sure no corner brushed against the platform. Every time she finished a small task, she noticed how it added to the graceful flow of the rehearsal. The king made a small mistake during one part of the walk, stopping half a second too early. It was a tiny error, barely noticeable. But Evelyn saw how he closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if disappointed. It reminded her that even a king, someone admired by millions, could feel pressure. That thought made her feel more connected to him, not as a royal figure, but as a person carrying a huge responsibility. Hours passed like minutes. Midnight slowly turned into early morning, without anyone noticing. The rehearsal continued with quiet dedication, each person contributing in their own way to something greater than themselves. Evelyn felt honored, deeply honored, to be part of this hidden moment in history, and though she did not fully understand why she had been chosen, she sensed that this night was only the beginning of something far more extraordinary. When the palace clock struck midnight the next evening, Evelyn Hart found herself once again walking toward the grand hall. The memory of the previous night still lingered in her mind, the glowing lights, the soft yet powerful music, and the king practicing each step with deep care. It had felt like being inside a hidden world that only a very few people were allowed to see. And now she was returning to that world, wondering what new surprises the night would bring. The corridors were quieter than usual, even more silent than the night before. Evelyn noticed that several lamps along the walls had been replaced with brighter ones, casting warm pools of light across the long carpet. She also noticed 2 extra guards standing at the turn that led toward the grand hall. Their expressions were calm but alert, which made Evelyn suspect that the secrecy around these rehearsals had deepened overnight. As she reached the grand doors, she took a deep breath before stepping inside. The moment the doors closed behind her, she was greeted by the familiar sight of the hall, lit in its full brilliance. The chandeliers sparkled like thousands of tiny stars captured in glass, and the marble floor shone so brightly it almost looked like water reflecting light. But something was different tonight. There were more people, musicians tuning their instruments, attendants adjusting decorations, advisors gathering around a long table near the throne platform. The atmosphere felt more focused, more urgent, as if everyone understood that the coronation day was getting close, and there was no time to waste. Evelyn walked quietly to her assigned area and found a small group of aides already discussing their roles. They greeted her warmly, but their smiles carried a hint of nervousness. Everyone seemed to sense that something important, something bigger than the night before, would happen during tonight's rehearsals. The royal advisor arrived soon after, holding a clipboard filled with neat notes. His voice was calm and reassuring as he explained that tonight's rehearsal would be a full run, every detail, every movement, every piece of music performed exactly as it would be on Coronation Day. This time, nothing would be practiced separately. Instead, they would follow the entire ceremony from beginning to end, without stopping. Evelyn felt a wave of excitement mixed with worry. A full run meant more responsibility for everyone. If anyone made a mistake, it could affect the entire practice. She looked around, noticing the determined expressions on everyone's faces. She knew she was not alone in feeling this pressure. When the musicians began playing the opening piece, the grand hall filled with warm and beautiful sound. The music rose gently at first, then grew deeper and more majestic, echoing through the tall columns and high ceilings. It created a sense of anticipation, as if announcing that something extraordinary was about to begin. The king entered from the far end of the hall, walking slowly but confidently. His robe tonight was a practice version of the real coronation attire, lighter and simpler but still elegant. A group of attendants followed behind him, holding symbolic objects wrapped in clean cloths. Everyone straightened their posture when he entered, not out of fear but out of respect. Evelyn watched carefully from her position. Her task was to assist with the ceremonial fabrics and make sure the platform remained perfectly organized. She focused on each movement, ready to step in at the right moment. The king walked up the long carpet toward the throne, following the music's rhythm. His steps were calm and timed with precision. The musicians kept their eyes on their sheet music, fingers moving gracefully over strings and keys. The advisors watched the king closely, whispering to each other when needed, taking notes each time he paused or moved. Every part of the rehearsal flowed like a carefully choreographed dance. But even in this beauty, there were small moments that reminded everyone that perfection took time. One musician accidentally played a slightly louder note that didn't match the rest of the orchestra. A banner on the side wall loosened itself from its hook and gently swayed before an attendant quickly fixed it. The king, at one point, lifted his robe too high, causing an awkward fold that the advisor later reminded him about. These moments weren't frustrating, they were reminders that this rehearsal existed to prepare them, to polish every detail before the world saw the real performance. As the full run continued, Evelyn noticed that the king seemed more relaxed tonight than he had the previous night. He still carried the weight of responsibility, but there was a trace of confidence in his steps. It was as if he had accepted the fact that he didn't need to be perfect immediately. He only needed to learn. There were times when the king smiled softly at a musician who corrected a note, or at an aide who carefully fixed his robe. These small gestures brought warmth to the hall, and reminded everyone that even in such a grand ceremony, simple kindness mattered. Halfway through the rehearsal, there was a short break. The advisor instructed everyone to rest for 10 minutes, before continuing with the second half. Evelyn took this moment to stretch her arms and breathe. She looked around the hall and appreciated the beauty around her, the polished floors, the banners flowing like gentle waves, the musicians chatting quietly while holding their instruments. She noticed the king standing near one of the tall windows, looking out at the night sky. Though she was too far to hear his thoughts, she imagined he must be thinking about the moment the crown would be placed upon his head. It wasn't just a symbol of honor, but also a symbol of responsibility. The people of the kingdom trusted him, believed in him, and hoped he would lead them with fairness and compassion. After the break, the rehearsal resumed with renewed energy. The second half of the ceremony involved important symbolic gestures, including the offering of the royal items and the king's oath. Though the real words of the oath would only be spoken on Coronation Day, tonight he practiced the movements, placing his hand on the ceremonial text, bowing at the right angle, receiving the royal sash with quiet dignity. Evelyn once again stepped forward at the right moment to adjust the cloth beneath the king's seat. She moved carefully, making sure the folds looked smooth from every angle. She didn't speak, but the king gave her a small nod to acknowledge her careful work. That nod filled her with pride and reminded her why she wanted everything to be done perfectly. Toward the end of the rehearsal, the final piece of music echoed through the hall. It was soft at first, then grew into a breathtaking harmony that made the moment feel almost magical. The king walked down the steps of the platform, following the same path he would take after he was officially crowned. The musicians ended the piece with a gentle final note that faded beautifully into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The quietness felt warm and bright, almost like a soft glow surrounding everyone in the hall. Then the royal advisor clapped his hands once, smiling with relief. The rehearsal had gone well better than many expected. There were small mistakes, of course, but nothing that could not be fixed. The king walked toward the center of the hall, thanking the musicians and attendants with sincere words. Evelyn stood quietly, letting the moment sink in. She felt as though she had witnessed something rare, something the world outside the palace would never truly understand. The midnight rehearsals were more than practice. They were a secret journey shared by people who wanted the coronation to be unforgettable. As the rehearsal ended and people began to leave, Evelyn noticed that the palace still felt alive, even though it was well past midnight. She walked back through the corridors with a peaceful heart. She felt proud of her role, however small, and excited for the rehearsals yet to come. Something told her that the next nights would hold even more surprises. The next night arrived with a feeling that something unseen was stirring inside the palace walls. Evelyn Hart sensed it the moment she stepped out of her small room and began walking toward the grand hall. The air felt heavier, as if carrying whispers that had drifted through the corridors all day. Servants she passed seemed unusually quiet, their conversations stopping whenever someone else approached. Even the guards stood straighter, their expressions focused, as if they had been given new instructions they couldn't share aloud. Evelyn tried not to let the change in atmosphere worry her. She reminded herself that the coronation was getting closer, and everyone naturally felt more pressure. Still, she couldn't ignore the small clues, the way people glanced over their shoulders, the careful silence, and the sense that something important had happened since the last rehearsal. She wondered whether she would find answers once she reached the grand hall. As she approached the familiar large doors, she noticed an extra set of guards, dressed in the ceremonial midnight blue uniforms. They checked her name on their list, nodded respectfully, and allowed her to enter. She walked through the doors with steady steps, wondering if tonight's rehearsals would be the same as before or entirely different. The moment she entered, she knew it would not be the same. The hall, still bright with its grand chandeliers, felt different. The music was not playing yet, and the musicians were not tuning their instruments as usual. Instead, they stood nearby in small groups, whispering quietly. The attendants moved with extra focus, adjusting decorations with more precision than before. Everyone seemed to be working with a seriousness that made the atmosphere both exciting and tense. Evelyn joined the other aides, who greeted her with faint smiles. She could tell from their eyes that they felt the same uncertainty she did, even if they couldn't explain it. Before she could ask anything, one of the senior aides leaned closer and said in a low voice, "There have been whispers. Something about a very old tradition that must be included in the coronation. No one knows exactly what it is, but it's making everyone nervous." Evelyn listened quietly. She had heard about old traditions during her time at the palace, but most of them were simple customs: lighting certain candles, using certain fabrics, placing items in specific positions. None of them sounded like something that would cause tension among experienced workers. A moment later, the royal advisor entered the hall with the king walking beside him. The king looked thoughtful, even more so than in previous rehearsals. His expression wasn't worried, but it carried the weight of someone who had been given new information, something important, something meaningful. The advisor called everyone together, his voice gentle yet firm. He explained that tonight's rehearsal would include a rare sequence, one that had not been performed in generations. It involved a symbolic gesture that took place in near darkness, with only one ceremonial flame lighting the room. This tradition was old, nearly forgotten, and required careful practice to honor its meaning. That was why the mood around the palace had become so serious. Evelyn felt her heart flutter with curiosity. She tried to imagine what it would be like to rehearse something in near darkness. The thought alone added a mysterious excitement to the night. She looked around and saw that others were equally intrigued. For many of them, this was the first time they would witness such a rare part of royal history. Before the special sequence began, the rehearsal followed the usual pattern. The musicians played beautifully, the king practiced each step with focus, and the attendants moved around the hall with coordinated grace. Evelyn performed her tasks with steady hands, adjusting fabrics and keeping track of the timing. But throughout the rehearsal, she felt everyone's anticipation building, waiting for the moment when the special sequence would be added. Late into the night, the advisor finally signaled for everyone to pause. A soft hush fell over the hall. The attendants began slowly extinguishing the chandeliers one by one, until only dim wall lamps remained. The musicians quieted their instruments, and the king stepped back, preparing for the next part. At last, the advisor brought forward the ceremonial flame, a single glowing light held inside a beautifully decorated lantern. The flame danced gently, its warm glow reflecting on the polished floor and the surrounding banners. The moment the lantern was placed on the central platform, the rest of the hall fell into almost complete darkness. Only the soft flicker of the ceremonial flame remained. Evelyn felt a soft chill run across her arms, not from fear but from the incredible beauty of the moment. The entire palace felt transformed. The bright, sparkling hall she knew so well was now a quiet, almost dreamlike space where shadows danced gently along the walls. The king stepped forward into the circle of light, his face calm but his eyes filled with focus. The musicians began to play a soft, slow piece far gentler than anything they had practiced before. The notes floated lightly in the air, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Evelyn watched as the king rehearsed the symbolic gesture, placing his hand near the flame, bowing slightly, and stepping back. Each movement was careful, controlled, and filled with meaning. The advisors watched closely, taking notes and whispering instructions. Everyone moved softly, so as not to disturb the sacred calm of the ritual. But as beautiful as the moment was, Evelyn sensed a growing tension. The older tradition required perfect timing and perfect movement. A small hesitation or misplaced step could break the flow. Advisors whispered more urgently. Musicians repeated certain notes. Attendants adjusted their positions with slow care. Whispers started spreading again. Some said the king seemed uncertain. Others said the tradition was more difficult than they expected. Even Evelyn felt the air grow heavier as the pressure increased. Mistakes were made. Not big ones, but enough to make people nervous. Someone misplaced a cloth. A musician started a note early. An aide stumbled slightly in the dark, and every time something went wrong, the room tensed. Evelyn watched the king, noticing a faint uneasiness in his movements. He was trying his best, but the quietness and darkness seemed to add a new kind of pressure. She realized that for him, this was more than a tradition. It was part of becoming the king, a moment that carried great meaning. After several attempts, the king completed the gesture with more confidence. The advisor nodded with approval, and the musicians ended their piece softly. The flame continued to glow warmly on the platform, almost as if proud of the progress made. Gradually, the attendants relit the chandeliers, bringing the hall back to its bright and familiar appearance. With the light returned, everyone seemed to breathe more easily. The tension lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of relief. But even then, Evelyn sensed that the night had changed something. People moved quietly as they returned to their tasks. Even the musicians spoke in softer tones. Everyone had felt the weight of the old tradition, the history behind it, the meaning it carried, and the responsibility of honoring it correctly. As the rehearsal came to an end, the king thanked everyone with sincere words. He still looked thoughtful, as if the ritual had left a deeper impression on him. Evelyn noticed that he paused near the ceremonial flame before leaving, studying it for a long moment, as though trying to understand something hidden within its gentle glow. When Evelyn walked back to her room later that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the ceremony. She felt amazed to have witnessed such a rare moment, something only a handful of people in the entire kingdom would ever see. She also felt that the rehearsals had taken a serious turn. as if the palace was preparing for something even bigger than the coronation itself. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that the coming nights would be even more intense and more unforgettable. The next rehearsal night arrived with a quiet tension that could be felt even in the air outside the palace. Evelyn Hart noticed it the moment she stepped into the long corridor that led toward the grand hall. Usually, the soft glow of the lamps along the walls made the palace feel calm and peaceful at night. But tonight, the lights seemed dimmer, and the shadows stretched longer. Even the gentle hum of the palace, which she had grown used to during the late evening hours, felt strangely muted. She walked slowly, her footsteps soft against the polished floors. As she passed a group of attendants, she noticed that they spoke in low whispers, their expressions serious. They quickly fell silent when she approached. Evelyn gave them a polite smile, though inside she felt a flicker of worry. Something about the behavior of the palace staff told her that tonight's rehearsal would be different, perhaps more challenging than any before. When she reached the entrance of the grand hall, the guards stepped aside for her, their faces steady but unusually tense. Evelyn took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready for whatever awaited her. The hall was already glowing with the soft golden light of the chandeliers. Musicians stood in their usual places, tuning their instruments carefully. Attendants moved around with baskets of cloths, trays of symbolic items, and tools for adjusting decorations. Yet something felt different. Everyone's movements were slightly quicker, more alert, as if they were trying to prevent an unexpected mistake before it even happened. Evelyn made her way to her position near the throne platform. When she reached the group of aides, she realized she wasn't the only one who sensed the unusual energy. Aides stood close together, speaking in gentle tones, glancing toward the center of the hall, where the ceremonial flame lantern rested on a tall pedestal. That single flame had been the focus of the previous night's rehearsal, and now it looked brighter than ever, its glow flickering softly across the hall. Before she could say a word, one of the senior aides whispered, "There's worry about the ritual. The king must perform it with perfect timing. If anything goes wrong, it could affect the meaning of the ceremony." Evelyn nodded slowly. She understood. The old tradition they had practiced last night carried deep symbolism. Everyone could feel the pressure of that responsibility, especially with the coronation day drawing near. Moments later, the royal advisor entered, followed by the king. As always, the king carried himself with grace. But tonight, his expression held an extra weight of seriousness. He paused briefly, offering a faint, reassuring smile to those working closest to him. Despite his calm posture, Evelyn could see the thoughtful look in his eyes. He was determined to master the ritual, no matter how difficult. The advisor spoke gently but firmly to the group. Tonight's rehearsal would focus heavily on the traditional sequence involving the ceremonial flame. The king needed to practice it repeatedly until the movements felt natural and confident. The advisor reminded everyone that their support was essential. Every person in the hall had a role that helped keep the rehearsal smooth and harmonized. The musicians began playing a soft piece as the evening rehearsal officially started. The music echoed lightly across the hall, creating a warm and steady rhythm. The king walked to the platform, moving with careful steps. Evelyn, watching from her position, felt a quiet admiration for him. Even under pressure, he showed patience and determination. The first round of the ritual began smoothly. The attendants lowered the lights, extinguishing the chandeliers until only the ceremonial flame remained. As the hall darkened, the single glowing flame became the heartbeat of the room. Shadows danced along the walls, creating a gentle, mysterious atmosphere. The musicians played a slow, soothing tune that matched the calm glow of the flame. The king stepped into the light circle, raising his hand in the symbolic gesture they had practiced before. Everyone held their breath, watching closely, hoping this round would be perfect. But then, something unexpected happened. A soft breeze, faint but real, drifted through the hall. No one knew where it came from. There were no windows open, no doors ajar. Yet the small movement of air brushed past the pedestal and touched the flame. The flame flickered once, twice, and before anyone could react, it went out. A hush fell over the hall. Not a sound could be heard. Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. The ceremonial flame was the center of the tradition. Without it, the ritual could not continue. The musicians froze, their instruments silent. The attendants stood still, their eyes wide with surprise. Even the king seemed taken aback, staring at the empty lantern as if trying to understand what had just happened. For a long moment, no one moved. The advisor looked concerned. He stepped forward, studying the lantern. "This has not happened in many years," he said softly. "The flame is meant to stay lit throughout the ritual. We must restore it before we continue." But how? The usual method to relight the flame wasn't appropriate for the sacred ritual. It had to be reignited in a specific way, following old rules that most people had forgotten. Evelyn watched the advisors whispering urgently to each other, each one uncertain how to proceed. A worried tension spread through the hall. If they couldn't restore the flame properly, the rehearsal might end early, and that meant the king would lose valuable practice time before the coronation. Some attendants shifted nervously. Musicians exchanged nervous looks. The king remained calm, but it was clear he was concerned too. In that moment of confusion, Evelyn remembered something. Weeks earlier, she had been organizing the old archive room where palace traditions were recorded. Among the dusty books and faded papers, she had come across a fragile little manual that described historical ceremonies in great detail. One passage had caught her attention, the one explaining how to restore a ceremonial flame if it ever went out. Her breath quickened slightly as the memory came back to her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should speak, but when she saw the advisor's uncertain expression and the king's serious eyes, she knew she had to say something. Evelyn stepped forward carefully. "I believe I know how the flame can be restored," she said softly. The advisor turned to her, surprised. The hall fell silent again, as everyone listened. Evelyn explained what she had read in the old manual, that the flame could be relit using a special method involving a specific type of candle placed at a certain angle within the lantern. The method was simple, yet required careful attention. It was designed to honor the symbolism of the flame without interrupting the meaning of the ritual. The advisor listened closely, and the king looked at her with appreciative interest. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt the weight of the entire hall's attention. But she stayed calm and spoke clearly. The advisor nodded. "Show us," he said. Evelyn walked toward the pedestal with slow, steady steps. An attendant brought her the candle the manual described. She placed it into the lantern exactly as she remembered. She tilted it gently, letting the wick touch the spot where the old flame had once burned. A second later, a small spark appeared. Then the flame began to grow again, glowing softly and steadily. A wave of relief spread through the hall. Musicians sighed quietly. Attendants relaxed their shoulders. The advisor smiled with genuine gratitude. The king stepped forward and gave Evelyn a warm nod. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Your knowledge has helped us continue." Evelyn felt her heart swell. She wasn't used to being noticed so directly, especially not by the king. But she felt proud not for herself, but for doing something that helped the rehearsal and the tradition move forward. The practice continued, smoother than before. The king performed the ritual again with renewed confidence. The flame's soft glow seemed even brighter now, as if thanking Evelyn for bringing it back to life. By the end of the night, the entire hall felt peaceful again. The earlier tension had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. People smiled at one another as they packed their tools and instruments. The advisor praised everyone for their patience and focus. The king thanked each group personally before leaving the hall. As Evelyn walked back to her room, she felt lighter than she had in days. She had played an important role in preserving a meaningful moment. She had helped keep the rehearsals on track, and though she did not seek recognition, the king's gratitude stayed in her heart. She knew the coronation was drawing very near, and she also knew that the final rehearsals would be the most unforgettable ones yet. The sun had not yet risen when Evelyn Hart woke up the morning after the near disaster with the ceremonial flame. She lay in her small bed for a moment, listening to the gentle sounds of the palace, waking up soft footsteps, distant clinking from the kitchen, and the quiet murmur of workers beginning their day. But even with all the usual noise around her, her mind kept returning to the events of the night before. She remembered the moment the flame went out, the silent shock that had frozen the entire grand hall, and the uneasy feeling that had swept through everyone. Most of all, she remembered the deep gratitude in the king's eyes when she restored the flame, using the old instructions she had read long ago. It was a moment she would never forget. She had not expected to stand out or be noticed, and yet, in a hall filled with skilled advisors and experienced attendants, she had been the one who remembered the forgotten method. Evelyn rose from her bed with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Tonight would be the last midnight rehearsal before the coronation itself. Everything they had practiced would be brought together one final time. It would be the moment when all their efforts blended into a full and complete ceremony. The thought made her heart beat a little faster. She hoped everything would go smoothly. She hoped the king would feel ready. Most of all, she hoped the ceremonial flame would stay steady and bright. The day passed slowly. Workers cleaned the hallways more carefully than usual. Florists arranged fresh flowers for the grand event. Cooks tested the last of the coronation dishes. Couriers rushed from one wing to another with important messages. Even though Evelyn's tasks were simple, she felt the weight of the upcoming ceremony in every step she took. By the time the palace clock chimed late evening, Evelyn was already dressed and prepared. She made sure her uniform was spotless and her hair neatly pinned. Tonight mattered, and she wanted to give her very best. As she walked toward the grand hall, the palace felt different tonight, not tense, not fearful, but full of quiet excitement. Lamps shone a little brighter, and the carpets looked freshly cleaned. Even the guards standing by the doors had softer expressions, as if they, too, could feel the importance of the moment. When Evelyn entered the grand hall, she was greeted by a breathtaking scene. The chandeliers shimmered like crystal waterfalls. The banners hung smoothly, without a single wrinkle. Fresh flowers lined the walls, filling the air with a delicate scent. Everything looked ready not for practice, but for something magical. The musicians were already seated, their instruments tuned and polished. The attendants moved with confidence. Having practiced their tasks many times, advisors stood near the throne platform, checking their notes one last time. Evelyn walked to her place quietly, feeling her heart fill with warmth. After so many nights of hard work, everyone had grown closer. Working like a single team, she could see it in their expressions, in the way they moved around the hall with trust and focus. When the king entered, the room felt complete. He walked forward with steady steps, wearing a practice version of his royal robe, but this time, there was something new in his posture, a sense of calm strength. He looked ready, ready to stand before his people, ready to accept the crown, and ready to lead with grace and responsibility. Everyone bowed respectfully as he approached. He greeted the musicians with gentle words, thanked the attendants for their dedication, and offered a sincere smile to the group of aides, including Evelyn. She felt a warm confidence settle in her chest. It was comforting to know that the king recognized the effort of every person in the hall. The royal advisor stepped forward to address the group. His voice was filled with pride as he explained that tonight's rehearsal was the final one. They would perform the entire ceremony from beginning to end without interruption. No one would be corrected. No one would stop mid-task. This would be their chance to ensure everything flowed smoothly. Just like on Coronation Day, the musicians raised their instruments. The hall grew silent. And then the first notes drifted through the air, soft, graceful, and full of hope. Evelyn watched as the king walked along the long carpet, each step perfectly aligned with the music. His robe flowed behind him in smooth waves. Attendants lifted and adjusted it expertly. Advisors observed the timing closely. The musicians played with gentle precision. It was the best opening they had ever performed. As the ceremony continued, Evelyn moved forward to adjust the ceremonial fabrics at exactly the right moment. Her hands were steady. Her steps were sure. She felt no nervousness now, only calm purpose. She knew what to do, and she trusted everyone around her. They were all working together with complete harmony. As the ritual progressed, It was time for the part that had caused so much tension before the traditional sequence with the ceremonial flame. Evelyn felt her heart quicken, but she reminded herself of what she had learned. She knew the flame was secure now. She had checked it personally before the rehearsal began. The attendants slowly dimmed the chandeliers. One by one. The hall darkened until only the gentle flicker of the ceremonial flame remained. Soft shadows filled the room, creating an atmosphere of quiet sacredness. The musicians began the slow, calming piece that matched the glow of the flame. Their notes floated gently across the hall like a peaceful breeze. The king stepped into the circle of light. His movements were elegant, controlled, and confident. He raised his hand, bowing his head in the symbolic gesture. The flame flickered softly but steadily, glowing as if guiding him through the ritual. The advisors watched silently. The attendants didn't move a muscle. Evelyn stood still, her heart full of pride at how beautifully everything was unfolding. When the king completed the gesture, the musicians ended the piece with a soft, delicate note. For a moment, the entire hall remained in darkness, filled with peace. Then the attendants relit the chandeliers, and the hall brightened once again. The king stepped back, with a satisfied expression. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see the relief in his eyes. He had done it perfectly. The final part of the rehearsal began the closing procession. The music grew grander, filled with hope and celebration. The king walked down the steps of the throne platform, exactly as he would on Coronation Day. Attendants moved gracefully. Musicians played joyfully. Advisors followed carefully, each step timed with precision. By the time the rehearsal ended, the grand hall was filled with a warm, glowing energy. Everyone felt it. They had done it. After nights of difficult practice, moments of uncertainty, and hours of dedication, they had created something beautiful, something worthy of the coronation. The king thanked everyone sincerely. His voice was warm with gratitude. He spoke of their hard work, their patience, and their loyalty. When he looked at Evelyn, he gave her a gentle nod that said more than words ever could. It made her feel seen, appreciated, and proud. As everyone slowly left the hall, Evelyn walked through the quiet corridors with a peaceful smile. She knew the world would see only the grand and perfect coronation. They would never know about the midnight rehearsals, the near disaster with the flame, the long hours, or the quiet teamwork behind the scenes, but she would remember, and she felt honored to carry that secret memory. When dawn finally approached, the palace began preparing for the coronation day. The world would soon witness history, and Evelyn knew she had played a small, but meaningful part in making it perfect.